Hello there. My name is Jay Steinmetz, Dr. Jay Steinmetz. I'm an assistant professor at Fort Hays State University in political science. And I'm here for a talk today with Odalis Jimenez, who's a senior at Fort Hays State University. She's a major in political science with an emphasis in public policy and public administration. Odalis is also the coordinator of the American Democracy Project. Want to say a few words about our talk and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so like you said, my name is Odalis Jimenez, and I am the coordinator for American Democracy Project. We do focus on having students be civically engaged, and either that's helping them to register to vote, or even teaching them about what free speech is, which is what we're having this week, the week of the 20th during October. So yeah, and I'm really excited today to have our talk because it is dealing with families in the Midwest and in Kansas, and how does conservatism fit in the modern family?
Yeah, the title of the talk that we have is the future of modern conservatism and the American family. This is a discussion that's kind of ongoing between both Odalis and I. We're basing this off of some discussion within the modern conservative movement, and in particular sort of the intellectual vanguard of modern conservatism. We're thinking about this through the lens of where does conservatism go in the future of politics, and how does modern conservatism center some of the core pillars and the core values of modern conservatism? How does it center the family, the community, the neighborhood? And what can government do? What can public policy do in order to support those things? Some of this conversation comes out of what both Odalis and I feel are some significant challenges. A rise in divorce rates, breakdown of a traditional family, the so-called norm in our political economy world of a two-wage earning household, and maybe that being part of the concern of a breakdown of the community and the household. Let me quote to you from a New York Times article dealing with, this is on Tucker Carlson and his Fox News program. And this is an op-ed article written by Ross Douthat, a conservative op-ed columnist for the New York Times. He says that Tucker Carlson recently gave a soliloquy on Fox News in which he accused his fellow Republicans of building an anti-family, finance-dominated economic system that might be, quote, the enemy of a healthy society. This, in general, is a criticism that modern conservatism has essentially, gone from a culture into economics, a critique of liberal cosmopolitan, and a critique of libertarianism that laments the decline of the family, to an argument that is a decline that can be laid at the feet of consumer capitalism as well as social liberalism. In a sense, this is a concern that we might be going beyond the old politics, that the paradigm shift is changing, and that it's not quite the paradigm shift of limited government versus big government, but instead a government that is centered on the future of the family, the health of society, the health of the community and the neighborhood. Do you think that some of the concerns that Tucker Carlson brings out and that Ross Douthat shares, do you think those concerns are really valid and important perhaps cracks in modern conservatism, problems, challenges?
Yeah, I think as the political climate shifts, because I feel like it's always shifting, especially in the Republican Party, even Democratic Party. And so, since our topic is the family and conservatism, and like you said, the modern family today, isn't just, this might be controversial to say sometimes, but sometimes, it just has to be said. It's, a man, two men or two women, and they do have these ideologies that are conservative. And being in a rural area, sometimes it's not a husband and wife, or maybe it's just a single parent. And as this political climate shifts, more people, I believe, have this idea of what conservatism is today and what it's supposed to look like. So, that being said, I feel like there is room for people to grow and actually call themselves conservatives, because we want to protect our families. We want to have the best interests for our families. so that's like my outlook right now, like on, the families and conservatism, and especially in the Midwest.
Yeah, there's some concern that modern conservatism is sort of moribund, right? That it's stuck in old ideals, and it's not speaking to a new demographic. It's not speaking to a younger generation as it did, say, maybe in the 1980s and 1990s. And I think that there's always going to be a conservatism, right? There's always going to be a progressive politics. And I think it's important for us to ask what kind of conservatism we want, and how, if these critics and these concerns are valid, that modern conservatism is stuck in the past and needs some revitalization. Well, how do we revitalize it? How do we re-energize a conservative movement that can appeal to a younger generation, that can continue, I think, to center the family and the community and the neighborhood? Ideas? Thoughts about that?
Honestly, I feel like social media has such a huge impact on how we view different parties, either that's Republican, Democrat, or even like, I guess moderate groups. I feel like we do have a chance to perhaps rebrand the Republican Party as we move forth. And, we're looking at a presidential election soon in 2020. And so, what does that mean for Republicans or even conservative families? I think there is going to be change, and the political climate will continue to shift. And I feel like that will, shed a little bit more light on like what to be Republican actually is. Because as of right now, I feel like there is a lot of misconceptions on what it is to be Republican in the current day. Because, to even say I'm Republican, I'm conservative, that's almost like people look at you weird sometimes, and they categorize you in this certain way.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there is a shift that's going to happen.
Yeah. It might be a little bit less in such a conservative state like Kansas, a little bit less of sort of feeling shame by even mentioning the fact that you're a conservative or Republican. It's certainly very pronounced on the coast, and where I used to teach as a professor at University of Oregon, which has a significantly large modern liberal population of students. A lot of conservative students felt as though they couldn't be vocal about their own political beliefs. That if they said they were a conservative, especially in the age of Trump, and we got to get to Trump eventually in this conversation, okay? Because there are a number of things that we need to untangle here in the Trump era. But in particular in the Trump era, I had a lot of younger conservative students who felt as though if they were to say they were conservative or supported the Republican Party, they may be accused of being racist or et cetera, et cetera. And so that's a real danger, I think, in a healthy democracy. You brought up social media. What's your position on social media in terms of its impact on our culture and our society? Do you think this is currently a very important social science debate? Do you think social media is fragmenting us and fracturing us, and we're following along these little echo chambers in terms of political discourse, and it's increasing our polarization and our partisanship? Or do you think that, like any new technology, there might be hiccups and downfalls, but social media nonetheless is a powerful technological medium to actually bring people together? Are you optimistic or pessimistic with regards to social media?
I'm actually pretty optimistic because, it's still a developing technology. Because, 10 years ago, we did not have all of the knowledge in our hands that we do today. And so I feel like since it is still relatively new, there is hope of bringing people together rather than bringing them apart. Because you have all this information, and later on I feel like people will just come to an understanding and really get their facts straight. And try to actually solve these kind of problems that we are seeing today in society. So I am actually quite optimistic. And I could see why people are pessimistic when it comes to having social media and seeing this as something that, I guess, would tear people apart. Because, when you're on social media, sometimes on Facebook this happens, where they kind of only, I don't know how to say it, it's like they put things on your feed that you only believe in. And I forget what that's called. I don't know. I know there's like a specific term for it.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar either, but it's something like selective optimization, right? Your social media experience is very much tailored toward the things that you choose, the things that you like, the kinds of activities that you engage in on social media. Right. So it tends to be this, it's like this organism that's changing and moving as you experience it and use it. Right. And this is something, of course, that tech companies are well aware of. There's a decided advantage of that when it comes to advertising, which is almost the sole source of revenue for most social media companies is advertising. But there might be some downfall of this in terms of political discourse. Because if we simply are in a social media environment that's always tailored toward our interests and what we choose, we're not going to necessarily be confronted with things that we wouldn't otherwise choose, or diverse viewpoints about certain matters, especially when it comes to politics, understanding culture and society, these sorts of things.
And I think, that's one of the challenges too that is in this like new development. We need to figure out should there be restriction on like what can we see and what can we not see? And should we be able to see everything? And that's both sides. I feel like throughout all of our lives, we're going to be challenged with different things that conflict our own beliefs, either that's moral or even that's in politics. And we should embrace those things because we should always keep looking for ways that we can expand our own knowledge and our own understanding of these different ideologies and these different ways of living.
Yeah, and how do we incentivize citizens to come to the center and to have a discussion? Now, that doesn't mean come to the center on policy positions necessarily. One can be principled in their progressive views or their conservative views, whatever it might be. But to have a conversation in the center, right, I think is a very important marker of a healthy democracy. I've thought about this often, and one of the questions that always comes to my mind, and a question that I ask my students directly in class, if you're a conservative, okay, then what kind of progressivism do you think is best for the country? What kind of left side of politics do you think, what are some positions on the left side of politics that you think work or are reasonable or are worthy to compromise with? And then the same question for liberal progressives in my class. What kind of conservatism do you want for the country? What kind of conservatism do you think works best? And so, in other words, to identify some of the stronger features, the more reasonable positions, and the things that you think the other side of the political divide gets right, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to add that although I feel like nowadays a lot of people are very moderate because, like I said, we do have that knowledge and we do have the technology and, we have access to so much out there.
Yeah.
And I feel like now, especially, my generation, they're a little bit more moderate in a sense. Because I feel like a lot of people understand that there's ways that different people live their lives. And, it is my belief that if it's not hurting anybody, then I believe you can do whatever you would like.
A wide degree of individual freedom and liberty, so long as you're not harming anyone. This is famously called the harm principle that John Stuart Mill discusses in On Liberty.
Exactly. And I feel like he got that right. Personally, I feel like that is, I think, fundamental to our society to try to accept and understand. Although if we don't believe in a certain thing that somebody does, say that, I guess, being a part of the LGBTQ community or like being an ally or something, you can be an ally, but you don't choose to, I guess, be, I don't know, bi or, any of that stuff. And so, that's something, a social view that people can do in their own individual lives that they're free to do.
Can conservatives be allies to the LGBTQ community?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
I think modern conservatism does have an open door for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to say and put like a definite and try to speak for all of
Mm-hmm.
conservatives.
Of course, yeah.
Because, there's some people that do have views that believe, you can't be an ally, you can't
Mm-hmm.
accept that,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
if it's not affecting you, and
Mm-hmm.
just don't choose to do it.
Yeah.
That's
And,
all right.
and this is, I think, the nature of ideologies as well. You can never speak for everybody. Ideologies are not fully contained and sort of pure in the world and have members who agree on every point. Ideologies are, and political beliefs are, varied and complex and complicated. But I think, asking that question that I ask you now, I think that we're in some ways walking down the road very specifically of what a modern conservatism, what a future modern conservatism ought to look like. Can you be conservative, Odalis, and believe in climate change, anthropomorphic climate change, man-made, human-made climate change, and be an environmentalist? What do you think?
I think you can. Because if you have specific facts, if you have things to back up your argument,
Mhm.
and there is tangible evidence,
Mhm.
which is the environment, and having all of these hypotheses and like having information to back that up,
Mm-hmm.
I think it is possible to be conservative
Mhm.
and be an environmentalist.
Mm-hmm.
It's no secret that if you affect the environment, there's going to be some sort of change in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think a really good example is Yellowstone,
Mhm.
when they eradicated all the gray wolves. This created a topographic cascade.
Mhm.
And that's when you remove one part of the ecosystem, which is the wolves, everything else starts to deplete. And so just knowing that and how the environment is very fragile,
Mhm.
I feel like having the knowledge and understanding that it is possible to be
Mhm.
conservative.
And be an environmentalist.
Exactly.
I think I totally agree, and I think even more emphatically, one thing that should be, I think, part of a discussion about what the future of modern conservatism is a reminder that historically, conservatives were often some of the most powerful conservationists and environmentalists. The environmentalist movement used to have a lot of conservatives in the movement, and in fact, conservation and conservative share a root etymologically, and the words are from the same root. The disposition to conserve, which is a quote from Edmund Burke, right? A definition of conservatism. That disposition to conserve traditions and values of the past that we hold dear is something that I think can logically connect to conservation, right? The protection of our natural and environmental world. This, I think, fits very well with this broader theoretical concept of conservatism, right? What does it mean to be a conservative? And let's ask that question directly. What does it mean to be a conservative?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people have these different definitions today of
Mhm.
what it is to be conservative.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is to be conservative in your economic ideologies, or be conservative in your social ideologies, but I feel like the core of being conservative or even being Republican is just the family values you have, taking care of your town or wherever you live,
Mhm.
and watching out for one another.
Mhm.
Honestly, I feel like being Republican and being conservative, it's the well-being of the people who surround you.
Mhm. Mhm.
I feel like that's the core
Mhm.
of it.
Mhm.
And I feel like everybody just wants the best
Mhm.
for everyone else.
Sure. Yeah.
And especially in small towns, you see that
Yeah.
because these small businesses, you ask them to help you fund a certain organization, and they're right there
Mhm.
to help you.
Mhm.
And although they're a small business, they're like willing to just give that helping hand.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like it's just a really great example in our society today of what it is.
Yeah. And I think that one of the powerful pillars of what we call conservatism is a care for the family and the neighborhood, as you just said. And this leads to a kind of, this is what I think we've discussed this actually in a class that you were in with me. I see this as a kind of schizophrenia of our modern liberal conservatism today. Schizophrenia in the sense that conservatives are often a lot more, if you look deeper down, a lot more communitarian, community-based than what the surface level impressions might be. Whereas, in fact, modern liberals and progressives, while on the surface of things tend to extol the virtues of the community, we're all in this together. Hillary Clinton wrote a book called It Takes a Village, right? But deeper down, liberal progressives are, I think, much more committed to an individualistic view of society than what is so easily apparent, that belies the kind of surface level impressions. In the sense, like, for example, identity politics policies on the left, right? I can choose my sexual orientation, or I can choose, et cetera, et cetera. These are, I think, individual choice level decisions, like, for example, the pro-choice movement in the abortion debate. Whereas conservatives, yes, individual liberty is important. Individual liberty is important for both progressives and conservatives. It just is a question of what kind of individual liberty we're talking about very often. But conservatives do have this sort of bedrock belief and value system that is based in a kind of communitarian worldview. Seeing society, seeing the interconnections between people as very important. And of course, I think this is also something that, and you touch upon this directly, that it's something we see in our everyday lives. Living in a place like Northwest Kansas, living in a small town environment, I was struck when I first moved here by the kindness and openness of the community and of people in an everyday setting, right? But also this sort of like, so many folks out here have this kind of very straightforward way of communicating with others, that there's not this kind of dripping sarcasm and irony with which so many people speak in our world today, especially, not to pick on younger folks, but especially younger generation tends to be sort of saturated with irony and sarcasm. But I find it refreshing that there's not a lot of that in Northwest Kansas. People say what they feel and what they mean, and often exhibit kindness first as almost an intuition. And I think these are some of the things that conservative values very comfortably rest alongside. So yeah, do you see that as kind of partly the future of conservatism?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair statement where you compare rural areas and being conservative as a communitarianism belief or ideology in a way, because it is a community where everybody wants to look out for one another. And a really big, I guess, staple of rural towns are small businesses. And I feel like, just being a small business is already hard enough, and then, bringing up the economics that's happening today with like tariffs and everything, that really hinders people and small businesses. But, I feel like that's why some conservatives feel like less government is better, because it does hurt their small business. But yeah, I think it is a fair statement to say that it is mostly communitarianism that's going on in our small towns.
Yeah, so let's get to that, government intervention, right? Not all government intervention is the same. Does a modern conservatism potentially still remain committed to a non-interventionist approach when it comes to the political economy, right? And you usually talk about concerns of small businesses. But that government reaffirms certain interventions and commitments, not in the political economy, but in our social sphere, in terms of public policy that deals with social issues. So, for example, the breakdown of the American family, as Ross Douthat had written, while it's true that the family breakdown in America has deep entangled roots, it's also true that in the 1940s and 1950s, a mix of government policy, union strength, he mentions, and conservative gender norms established a family wage, an income level that enabled a single breadwinner to support a family. So I think what Douthat is sort of implying here is that maybe that old paradigm of just small government, small government, small government needs to be revised and reorientated toward a government that benefits rural America, small town America, a government that can cultivate or incentivize a strengthening of the family, of the neighborhood, of the community. What do you think?
That's, I think it's hard to say, really.
It's a complicated question.
It really is, and I feel like a lot of people have been trying to figure that out, especially our lawmakers.
Yeah.
Our senators and representatives.
Mm-hmm.
They want to find ways that government will benefit small communities
Mm-hmm.
and small towns, especially to protect them from disappearing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these small towns are here because there is agriculture being
Mm-hmm.
produced.
Mm-hmm.
And, if they don't have those stores, like markets, to go get food, who's going to want to come out here in, rural America and work on a farm?
Yeah.
So I feel like it is very important to protect small communities and small businesses in order for our agriculture community to thrive.
Yeah, certainly. Let's talk about Trump. Is Trump the future of conservatism? Much has been talked about in this regard because let's establish some basic facts that we can all agree on. Trump is very different than the Republican Party that came before in a lot of ways. Trump has himself articulated a vision of conservatism and the Republican Party that he acknowledges is quite different and in some ways removed from traditional conservative policies. For example, on the political economy issue, right? Core to modern conservatism has consistently been a political economy or an approach to political economy that accepts free trade and essentially global capitalism. Trump's protectionist economic policies are quite different than that. And the tariffs and the trade war with China has, I think, it has its own consequences in society and the economy, and et cetera, but it also has some consequences for what we call conservatism and the Republican Party. So those are just some examples, but I think the question is fairly simple. Does Trump represent, or has the shift toward Trump, and I think we can also safely say that the Republican Party is the party of Trump now. The Republican Party has lined up fairly solidly against him, behind him, rather, sorry, behind him. You may quibble with that, but what do you think? Is he the future of modern conservatism?
That is also hard to make a comment on, because it's like you can have these different ideologies and everything and believe in what the president is doing today
Mm-hmm.
and how he represents the Republican Party, which I feel like the majority of Republicans, modern conservatism today, I feel like a lot of them believe that he does not represent the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm. So you do quibble with this notion that Republicans are solidly behind Trump. I tend to agree with you more than I disagree with you on this point, and I think that there's something there. It is certainly true that that on the Hill in Washington right now, Republicans certainly give lip service to supporting Trump. But I also suspect that there is a great deal of discontentment in the party, amongst party operatives, party activists, citizens who are conservatives, and Republican congresspersons on the Hill. And so, It remains to be seen where that goes. Obviously, we are now dealing with another crisis of impeachment here with regards to the Ukraine phone call and charges that Donald Trump is essentially soliciting help from a foreign power for domestic political purposes. And that has set this question again in this controversial setting, which is what are Republicans going to do about this, especially Senate Republicans, right? Because I think it's highly likely that impeachment is going to happen in the House. And now when a Senate undertakes a trial, the question of whether or not Senate Republicans, even just a small number of them, are going to support conviction and removal, that's, opens up a huge question, a huge can of worms here. And I don't know if I have a question there, but what do you think about all that stuff? I mean, especially the political controversies as potentially a breaking point. Maybe it does open up more ground in which conservatives and the Republican Party it's not just about Trump, that conservatives begin articulating post-Trumpian sort of positions and platforms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, that is like an ongoing case. And so I feel like there's no definitive answer on that, because, there has to be an investigation. There has to be, due process. There has to be everything in order to say whether or not the president was wrong for, in fact, contacting a foreign country to get evidence or get information on Joe Biden's son. It's
and we can call it political dirt. It's okay.
Right. Okay.
It's what it is. It's political dirt.
Yeah. I mean, he's trying to get all this, I guess, political dirt, as you say, on the president or on Joe Biden, and the question is he abusing his position of power?
Yep.
Because that is what he's there for.
Yeah.
It's to deal with foreign relations.
Yeah.
And so you just have to question, was it appropriate for him as the president to get information on his political opponent?
Yeah.
So that I feel like that's a way that we should be trying to observe this situation.
Yeah.
Because anybody abusing any sort of power, especially like the President of the United States, that does call for concern for our national security.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you centrally hit on it. That's the question, right? Is there an unconstitutional abuse of power by this president? It's not necessarily a crime. Now, you can attach crimes of bribery, campaign finance violations, whatever. But the impeachment proceeding is a political process. It is not a criminal process. So a crime is not even necessary for an impeachment proceeding to take place. So you're a little skeptical as to whether or not Trump really is going to, that Trump's brand of politics and his position on issues reflects the future of conservatism. And I think one of the potential specific issues that is at the center of this as well is immigration policy, right? Now, the Republican National Committee in 2012, once they lost that re-election, Obama won re-election and Mitt Romney lost, the Republicans went back and did a bit of soul searching and wrote the famous autopsy document, which said, look, we're not really vital in national politics as much as we used to be. We need some revitalization. We need some revision of where we're going to go as a party and as the party of conservatism. What's it going to look like? One of the issues that they identified in the autopsy was immigration reform, and essentially saying, look, the Republican Party has got to get over the anti-immigration kick. It's got to embrace, in particular, Latino, Hispanic Americans, which represent a potential huge growth area in modern conservatism. Statistics suggest Latino and Hispanic Americans have higher church attendance numbers than non-Latino.
And especially young Latinos as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and a number of other factors, it looks like that there is tremendous growth opportunity for Republican Party, but for conservatism itself, with immigrant America more broadly, not just Latinos and Hispanics, right? But that's obviously not where the party went under Trump. I think we can agree with that. And so is this one of the issues that in which the future of modern conservatism is not going to be Trump somewhere down the line?
Yeah, and I think that's what I mean about the political shift, is because, we have this population of largely Latinos in America. Some can say that they will be the majority of people that make up the people in America one day, and perhaps soon. But I feel like the political shift is going towards less of anti-immigration to what can we do and how can we make the system work a little bit more for people who do want to work and give to our society and contribute. I feel like that's where we're heading to. And especially Latinos, I feel like they will be a big part of the conservative organization, basically, because of the core family values, because of the communitarian kind of values we do have. I can personally say that, being a Latina and knowing that family is very important, and family always comes first, and I feel like that is what the conservative view is, of like taking care of your own family, taking care of your community, and just making sure everyone's okay.
Yeah, and it comes full circle right back to the family, where this discussion really began, right? And it is no doubt the case that Latino American culture and society has so many virtues and values to them of being family-centered, but also a significant number of small business owners, as you were saying before. So those issues of political economy come into play. And a culture that prides in itself in hard work as well.
I agree.
Hardworking, small business, entrepreneurial, innovative, and family-based. This might be exactly the kinds of things, and this isn't just a wholesale revision of modern conservatism. In fact, this is kind of a return to some of those values that have always animated modern conservatism. And that in itself, I think, not to get too meta and philosophical here, but that in itself is conservative. That one of the ways that I understand conservatism is that it looks to the past for solutions in the present, because the time-tested ways that we did things, the traditions and the norms of our past, often have vital solutions for the present. And so to return back to some of these things of family-orientated, of a value in hard work and of small business, and away from the anti-immigration rhetoric, because I'm not so sure, and I think you would agree with me, I'm not so sure anti-immigration rhetoric really does anything for the average American working class, middle class citizen in this country.
I agree with that. And, touching on the issue of immigration, I feel like a lot of Latinos veer away from calling themselves conservative, because if they feel like they agree with a party that is predominantly can be seen as anti-immigration, they feel like they're going against their own, I guess, beliefs, and what the Latino population represents. And so I feel like once we veer away from the anti-immigration, I feel like it will open that door for a lot of people to join the Republican Party and start having an open mind and define, once again, what true conservatism is today. Yeah.
So how do you get there? In a very practical sense, how do you get there? One might say, well, it's at the ballot box, right? It's in terms of voting, right? One might say it takes some mobilization, however. It takes some communication. It's not just about voting. It's not just about choosing the right elected officials. It's potentially about that messy work of having political discourse in which people are having conversations, in which, for example, the young generation of Hispanic and Latino Americans reaching out to white conservatives and having a conversation about the values of conservatism potentially.
Yeah, I feel like once that does happen, and I mean, even today it's happening, as we get to those conversations more and just coming together and having those conversations, we're going to find that we have more similarities than differences, especially on how we view our families and how we view our communities. Because, at the end of the day, all we want is a safe home. All we want is, economic stability and knowing that we can take care of our families. And that was my parents' main priority, is making sure that we were okay, making sure that we were good financially, our health was okay, and I feel like that's where the base is.
The base, although I would say we got to go much further. Prosperity is really, I think, key. Socrates says it best in Plato's Republic, in which he says, we don't just want to live, we don't just want to survive, we want to live well. Right? What does it mean to live well? It's, so again, we're coming back to prior parts of this conversation with regards to political discourse and how to bridge the divide, right? And we live in such a polarized political world today. Polarization is at historic highs. And I'm teaching a graduate level seminar actually on polarization right now, and some of the things that we're discussing is that, the studies suggest that issue polarization on the ideas, on the issues themselves, is not really that pronounced at all. It goes directly to what you were saying. If we have more conversations together, we'll realize we have actually more similarities than we have differences. There is, in fact, a very broad middle of the American political community that agrees on a wide variety of things. Now, for a number of reasons, media, political elites, whatever it might be, it often doesn't look like that on the surface of things. It looks like we're really far apart. But you even take very divisive, highly polarizing issues like abortion, for example. A large percentage of American people, a big center, a big chunk, don't like late-term abortions and don't like the idea of abortion on demand. But same big chunk wants a wide availability of contraceptives for women and family planning and child planning as something that women have a choice and a control over. But what these studies suggest, and this is the downside, right? The optimistic argument here is that polarization is not really, issue polarization doesn't really exist as much as we think it does, and that there is a lot of agreement on the issues. But the downside is that what studies suggest where most of our polarization comes from, it's called social polarization. It's group distance, to use a sociological term. Social polarization suggests that we are polarized in our ways of life and how we see each other. We're increasingly sort of tribalistic. It's basically like rooting for a hometown team, right? If you're a New York Jets fan, you hate the New England Patriots, and you don't hate the New England Patriots because they pass more than they run, or they run a 4-3 defense or whatever. You hate the New England Patriots because you just hate their very identity, right? And this is unfortunately the kind of polarization we have in this country, is that conservatives increasingly look at liberals and say, you folks are aliens from outer space. I don't even understand how you could possibly be a liberal. I don't even understand your way of life. Increasingly, we don't live in the same neighborhoods. Purple neighborhoods are slowly disintegrating, and even if you look at the local level, blue folks live in blue areas and red folks live in red areas. Okay, and vice versa. Liberals look at conservatives and say, how could you possibly be a conservative, right? We're just sort of, the social polarization is so large. That is a tragedy, but I think it's something that can be solved, right? How would you go about solving that?
Well, that's almost like asking someone to save the world in five minutes, but it will be a process.
Yeah.
For sure.
But I asked that question because I think you actually already answered it, You were talking about the need for discourse, the importance of discourse, of coming together, right? Of having a conversation. And I think that's part of the key. We need a social media environment. We need a everyday, real life environment in which we're having conversations, in which we're in especially physical, proximity to one another, so that we can see one another, so that we can talk to one another, so that we can have conversations about what does it mean to live well, what does it mean to prosper, right? We'll have to wrap it up here. It's been great talking to you, Odalis, and maybe we should do this more often.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I mean, although there was like some topics that were a little bit touchy and controversial, I feel like it is very important, either that's talking and sharing it with everybody here, or that's just even like having one-on-one conversations.
Yeah.
Well,
as a political scientist, I always say, it's important to talk about tough political issues.
Yeah.
So we put it to you. What does it mean to live well? What is prosperity? I'm Dr. J, and this is Odalis. Thank you for tuning in and listening to our debate, and we'll see you next time.